All right, thank you so much. First thing I want to say is thanks for having me this morning. It's always great to get back and be able to share a little bit of my knowledge with kids and parents alike. If y'all have any questions, for some reason I can't see the question bar. So if Laura or somebody can relay those questions to me, I'd be glad to answer anything as we go along. So just yeah, I'm going to go ahead and get started. This is Raising Poultry for Show. It's going to give you all some information on what to look for, what we need to do in order to get some competitive birds into the show ring, whether that's at majors or county livestock shows. So first things first, the key to raising competitive show poultry is we got to have excellent management practices. We have to have good housing for those birds. They need to be able to stay dry and dry when it's wet outside, and cool when it's hot, and warm when it's cold. They need to have a clean environment. The cleaner those birds are, the better they'll actually do. It's nicer whenever you go to a show that you have clean birds instead of dirty ones. And if you're keeping your pens clean, if you're fluffing shavings and turning those things over and keeping it clean, you'll be amazed at how clean those birds stay. There's no need to clean your birds before you go to the show because they will naturally do that. And then one of the biggest things that people don't think about is fresh water. That's probably one of the most important things whenever it comes to raising poultry, is if you're not willing to drink that water that they're drinking, then it's too dirty. Now, I'm not saying go out there and drink after the birds. That's not what I'm getting at. But what I'm saying is whenever you're using waters, whenever you're cleaning those things out, make sure they're clean. If you get out there in the morning and they seem really nasty, but you're running a little late, well, do you want to win the show, or do you want to necessarily maybe get to school or work or something, 2 minutes earlier? Take the time to clean out those waters and to make sure that those birds have something fresh to drink. We want to make sure that they have a balanced nutritional diet. We want to make sure that they're getting fed something that is formulated for them. And then efficient culling and selection. You're not going to win a show if you're sending the wrong birds to the show. That starts all the way back at, some people cull at week 2, some people cull at week 3. It all depends on how much room you have. But if you're not culling properly or you're not culling enough, then you can have problems where the birds aren't growing like they should, or you're just sending the wrong birds to the show. So we'll get started with bird environment. We'll talk about that and housing. So like I was saying, temperature is really important. We typically say we have a step down phase in the industry that we use, and everything's ran off of thermostats. And that's something that you can do inside of your houses your poultry houses at your home. Set up thermostats, and you want to make sure that those birds are where they need to be. We typically say week 1, we want them anywhere from 95 to 100 degrees. 100 is probably a little bit on that hot side. I'd say they're around 95. It would be fine. But it's kind of just paying attention to your birds. If you have heat lamps on them and they're running as far away from the heat lamps as they can then they're probably too hot, and you probably need to back off the heat a little bit. And then every week after that, we say we drop down 5 degrees. So if we're 95 degrees week 1, we drop down to 90 for week 2. And then we go down to 85 for week 3, all the way down until, we're getting ready to go to show and we're trying to get it to 65 to 70 degrees. We are in Texas. We do deal with humidity a lot. And sometimes it's not easy to get them down to 65 degrees. And so sometimes you just have to get them as cool as you can. If I know with the Washington County show, it's in September, so you're raising birds in the hottest time of the year. So it's really important to try and get those birds as cool as possible. Some people use, enclosed housing with air conditioners. That's great, but not everybody can afford to do that. And so just air movement, getting wind on those things with fans, anything you can do to make sure that the temperature is where you want it. When those birds are really young, you don't want too much air movement on them because you'll give them what's called wind chill, and those birds will get too cold and then they'll stop eating and things like that. And that's what we want to try to get away from. Ventilation's the same thing, kind of. It's blowing air across the birds. It's getting air out of the house. If you're raising your birds in the garage, and let's say you haven't cleaned up the shavings lately, you're going to smell what we call ammonia, where it's a little warm in there. Your shavings aren't quite clean, and you get this really strong odor that hits you in the face. You want to make sure you ventilate that out. Sometimes if your ammonia gets too bad, it can cause some major issues for the birds, and that's what we would call animal welfare issues, and that's stuff that you want to try to not have to deal with. So making sure that you have constant air movement out of that building or barn that you're in, to just make sure you're getting fresh air. Open up a window on one side with fresh air going out the other side. Or if you're using a AC unit, making sure you have an exhaust fan to push that old air out. You want to make sure that, if you're pulling air through the barn, open ventilation, you want to make sure that it's not 30 degrees out and you have your fan running full blast with the window up, because then you're bringing 30-degree air into your barn. And again, you're trying to find that smooth medium of what works. Litter is a big thing. You can use pretty much any kind of shaving. They have sawdust. I think I have one of those later. I'm not sure. But you want to make sure you're keeping your litter clean, and you want to make sure you're fluffing it. So when I say fluffing shavings, I mean you're turning them over. What we did whenever I was in school is we had like a 1x2 piece of wood, and you can get them 4 foot long, and that's long enough that when you're standing up, you just run them across the ground, and it takes some new shavings that are on the bottom and it fluffs them up. And what it does is that allows those shavings on the bottom to come on top, and it kind of aerates them and cleans them out. And you may get a little bit more life out of those shavings. Feed and water, we want to make sure we always have fresh feed. If you look in the feeders and there's a lot of dust, throw it out. I mean, I know it's wasteful, but hold on to it and you can feed it to your coal birds or your birds that you have at the house. But you want these birds to have the optimum amount of feed all the time. So if you ever look at your pens and they're really dusty, it could be really dusty every day. And so you need to dump that feeder out. It's ideal to have, fresh feed in there all day. If you go out there in the middle of the day, I know that's hard when you're in school or your parents work, but, if grandma doesn't mind going around and checking on your birds, have her check in there and have feed ready for her, so that if your birds are out of feed, she can get in there and dump a little bit in there and fill those feeders up. Water, again, fresh water all the time. Can't specify that enough. You have to have fresh water. It has to be clean. You have to be willing to drink out of it. And then cleanliness, like I said, just making sure we're cleaning those shavings out, making sure that barn is clean and all the time so that your birds stay clean. So housing, housing doesn't need to be anything fancy. It doesn't have to be new. It doesn't have to be permanent. It doesn't have to be separate structure. Turkeys might require a little bit more substantial housing than chickens just because they get so much bigger. But it doesn't need to be this fancy building that you go and put up and that you have there forever. Whenever I was in school, we used these old pens that we built out of 2x4 with open sides, and we made it work, and we put that styrofoam insulation board on it in the wintertime that you can get from Lowe's or Home Depot, and to able to make walls that way during the wintertime. You just have to work with whatever you have. If you have a garage, garages are great places to be able to house birds. I know mom and dad may not like moving their vehicles out of the garage for, 6 weeks, but again, it's only 6 weeks and then you're done. So you just want to make sure that you have protection from the extreme elements. You don't want your birds getting wet. You want to be able to keep them warm. You want to be able to keep them cool. It just depends on what we're dealing with. Adjust to winter and summer conditions, like I said. You want to make sure it's predator tight. If you live in a rural area where you might have to deal with raccoons or coyotes or things like that, you want to make sure there's no holes, all the way to the roof, all the way on top, that anything can get in. I had a problem one time, and a raccoon got into our pen, and it wasn't our pen, thankfully, but it was a friend's, and they got 14 turkeys that night out of, I think they had 25 at the time. So you talk about the raccoons are culling for you, and that's not what you want. You want to make sure that you're keeping that 100% tight and ready to go, so that nothing can get in. And then, again, providing a comfortable environment, making sure we're maximizing growth. Ventilation. So talked about this a little bit earlier, but just to go on it a little bit more, the purpose is to get more oxygen in there, to enhance those litter conditions. So making sure you're pulling air over them so that the litter can dry out. That's the whole point of fluffing the shavings. Reducing the ammonia levels. Like I said, it can cause some issues with the birds. It can really affect their respiratory system. It can burn their lungs and things like that. Just like, I don't know if you've ever walked in a barn that had some high ammonia levels. It's pretty tough. And so making sure that, we're taking the time to really pay attention to that. Helps you get even temperatures throughout the pen. So having fans in the corners blowing down to create some wind movement in your barn is very important, and it also helps optimize your bird comfort. So using ventilation, it helps you control the temperature. You can use brood heat, cooling with natural cooling, like I was saying, by having like open windows, open sides where the wind and air can come in. Fans are so important. I recommend not buying like the old janky looking small plastic box fans from Home Depot. I know they're cheap and I know that they're easy to get, but pay a little bit more and get the little bit heavier duty ones that are made out of wire. They put out a little bit more air. I can show you what I'm talking about here in a minute. I have one here in my office that I can show y'all. But they put out more air. They're a little bit heavier duty. You can hang them better, and they're just better all around. You can use evaporative cooling. They make these evaporative cooling fans, like Portacool makes them. They're great and all, but they're expensive. If you don't have the money to pay for a Portacool fan, then you got to make do with something else. And then air conditioning is, again, you want to make sure you have something big enough to cool down the area that you have. One little bitty old, what am I trying to talk about? Window unit may not work. You may want like central air. I know some people do that. You may not be able to afford it. Again, it's all, you have to work within the means of you, and it can definitely be done. You don't need anything fancy. Temperature, I talked about it earlier, but again, it's important. You got to have the appropriate temperature and pay attention to the behavior of the birds. The young chicks and poults, they're going to let you know what they need. They're going to tell you how they're acting. If they're all huddled together underneath a light, they're cold and they need more heat. If they're all as far away from the light as possible, up in the corners, pressed away, they're hot. So they need to be cooled down. They're going to tell you and show you what they need. And so it's important that you're spending time with those birds and that you're paying attention to them and that you're out there constantly. You get those birds on a Friday night, you should be out there almost all night on Friday, just checking on them, making sure they're okay, because the first 24 hours really is probably the most important time in making sure that those birds get what they need and are able to make it to the next day. And then, yeah, so it just kind of tells that. And so this is a pin that we kind of set up at our poultry facility just to kind of show what it could look like. This may be something that you do inside of your garage. It doesn't, I mean, these are made out of PVC. There's probably $30, $40 worth of PVC here. We use the plastic down at the bottom so that we can keep the shavings from kind of falling out of the pin so that you're not making a mess. But that just kind of shows, there's a heat lamp in there. There's those 2 red feeders and waters. It's really basic, but sometimes that's all it needs to be. This pin right here, this is one that I got from Dale Hyatt. I'm not sure who this belongs to, but obviously you can tell this is a turkey pin. Someone built this in their backyard, and it's plenty big. You can see in the back there they have the hens separate from the toms up here on the front. But it just goes to show, like, it doesn't need to be anything super fancy. This is, in my opinion, this is kind of fancy. It's got the nice roof, built nice. It's got the tin walls. This is getting up there, but it's all about how much time and effort you want to put into it. If you ain't got the money, this is absolutely right here. This is something you could do. This just kind of shows, I think this belongs to one of our professors. This is the kind of barn that he uses. But this is just like a shed in your backyard. If mom and dad have a shed in their backyard that they haven't ever used, it doesn't need to be super big to raise 25 to 50 broilers. When I was a senior in high school, I'd pick some birds for a kid that they raised their birds in they raised 2 sets of birds in a 4x8 lawnmower shed like this. They split it down the middle. One kid had a 4x4, one kid had a 4x4, and they both placed at Houston, and one of those kids got 5th overall at Houston. So again, it doesn't have to be fancy. You just have to be able to put the time and effort into it. This is another building. It just kind of shows how you're hanging those fans. That's the type of fan that I'm talking about. That metal fan that is a little bit heavier duty. They come with a nice bar to hang on, and you can hang them up and point that thing down to where it's blowing on those birds. The only thing that I don't like about this barn and this setup is the lighting isn't very good. So you can kind of see that on the back side of that pin, those birds are kind of in the dark. That's one thing that you want to avoid, is you want to make sure that those birds are getting plenty of air. Plenty of light. You want to make sure there's no shadows. For some reason, when birds find a shadow, they stick to that shadow and they stay there. You want to make sure that there's light all the time, and that you're making sure there's light everywhere. So now I'm going to get into nutrition a little bit. I just have one slide, and I kind of want to go through it, but it may take a while. But, nutrition is important. When we talk about wanting to raise show birds, we want to make sure we're using a complete feed. And, when I say complete feed, I'm talking about one that's specifically formulated for show poultry. You want to make sure that, you're not feeding them hen scratch that you got from the local Tractor Supply, or just some chick starter that you just picked up. You want to make sure it's specifically for show poultry. And the reason being is those formulas are formulated specifically for these birds to maximize their growth and potential in a short period of 6 weeks. So it's sticking to kind of name brands that we know. So there are other types of feeding formulas out there, but the ones that I know are Producers Co-op has a really good chicken feed. If you're here in the Brazos Valley area or Washington County, Producers is such an easy location to get to. It's an hour drive for us. So, and they make all their feed on site, so you know that it's fresh. You know that you're getting something that was made within the last month. Um, Usually, if stuff gets too old, they will recycle it and use it for something else. So they don't like keeping stuff on the shelves for too long. Um, and so you know you're getting a fresh feed. You know it's formulated. The nutritionist over there, his name's Robert Barrett. He's been doing this for a really long time at Producers. He's gotten advice from some of our professors here at Texas A&M, and they've really done a great job of formulating their feed. Purina is another one. Purina Show Chow, it's great. It's all over the place. The problem that I've had with Purina is sometimes you don't know how fresh the feed is that you're getting. So, whenever I was in it, it was 2-3 months old and it was already turning into a dust or it was full of weevils. And so, making sure that you're getting fresh feed, it's fine, but, make sure that the feed store you're buying it from is giving you the fresh stuff, not the stuff that's been sitting on the shelf for so long. And then they have ACO, and if you try and Google ACO, you won't find anything on it because I've tried to do it. But there's a feed store out of St. Hedwig, Texas, which is down around the San Antonio area. And they sell this ACO feed, and they have it specifically formulated for themselves. And this ACO feed, I would say, is more for turkey producers. If you keep up with the turkey industry anywhere in the state of Texas, and especially show turkeys, whenever you go to the majors, the people down in the San Antonio area do a really good job, and they're feeding this feed. They have a finisher that is super high in fat, and it's an extruded pellet, which Producers doesn't. They don't provide that type of. They don't have an extruder at their facility, so they can't make that type of pellet. But it's a really good feed. And the reason why I say ACO is because ACO makes it for them. But they're out of St. Hedwig, Texas. If you're raising turkeys, I would highly recommend making the drive over there. I think it's just, I've personally never used it, but the people who are winning at the majors are using it. And so that just goes to show that they're doing something right. So if you're trying to look for something different to use, I might try to do that. I don't necessarily think it may be the best thing for the chickens, because I know people that have done better on Producers feed for chickens.
You push the red button.
And so, it's just something that you need to figure out what's best for you, what's easier, what's closer. It just needs to be what is good for you. And then supplements. There's all kinds of stuff out on this market. I just kind of tried to throw together the few that I knew off the top of my head. Fortify and Amplify is something that is made by one person that used to be here at Texas A&M. She got her PhD in nutrition from here. Her name's Mallory Lee. She has a Facebook page, PNR Feeds, that she's selling this stuff at. It's now being sold at Producers. It's also sold at that St. Hedwig store. It's sold all over. They're really getting up there. All the big time growers that I know that are doing well at Houston, San Antonio, with turkeys and chickens are feeding this supplement. They specifically formulated it to be good for show poultry. I think it's amino acid mixture. I'm not 100% sure. Don't hold me to that. But all I know is that it's specifically formulated for these birds. It comes with instructions on how to feed it. And it's a supplement that you start from day one. It's kind of expensive, but all supplements are expensive. So for what it is, I definitely think it would be worth it to give it a look at and give it a try. It just does really good. Some other ones, people are using R&D. They use Early Bird. I personally have never used those supplements, so I'm not sure exactly what they are or what they do. I do know a lot of people that use them and have some success. So people out of Burleson County, they do really well with these supplements and making it work for their program. So you just kind of have to see, pay attention to the guaranteed analysis. That's the tag on the bucket that shows what's in it. Making sure, understand what you're feeding your birds, and, see if it makes sense for what you're trying to do. Golden Flow, that is a fat supplement. We say that we want to increase fat intake, because it helps increase, they help turn it into muscle. And it's a supplement that people have used. It's a liquid that you can pour on top of your feed. You can mix it in. There's just multiple different people that use it. They may use it in, some people use lard, bacon grease, stuff like that. If you can't afford to eat that much bacon, or your heart won't take it, maybe you buy Golden Flow and you switch that out for your bacon grease. And then there's Champion Drive, which is a Purina product. They used to make a feed called Fast Fat. I believe Mormons used to make it, that you could mix in, and this is kind of what Champion Drive took over. Again, it's just another fat supplement that you mix in, kind of like you would the R&D or something like that. But I'm not here to push one or the other, tell you what to get. Just trying to give you a couple different options for you to look into and think what might be the best thing for you. To go back to Producers and Purina, they have feed programs that they have on their websites that you can get. It tells you exactly what feeds to feed, when to start them, when to change them. So if you're starting out, it's your first time, and you don't have anybody to go to, that may be the best place to start. So if you have to go into Producers and ask to talk to someone, if you have questions, I'm sure they'll answer them. Same thing, I'll try to answer as many questions they'll have too. But as far as a feeding program goes, I'm not going to give one of those out, but they definitely have feeding programs at Producers and Purina that you can use, that people have done well on, so it's just something to always pay attention to. So feeders and waters, we kind of want as much feed and as much waters into this pen as we can get. You can use tube feeders, you can use pan feeders. Making sure we're adjusting those things. You don't want to keep them on the ground for the entire time. If that bird has to work to get food, or it has to work to get water, it's not going to eat. It's not going to drink. It'll eat enough to stay alive, but it ain't going to eat enough to win you the show. Sanitation. You want to rinse and clean your waters daily. Scrub them with soap at least weekly. If you set your water in there, it's going to get a layer of like phlegm or film on it that you want to get out of there. It's not something that you want to keep in there. So the feeders, these are two types of feeders. I meant to put another picture on here, but that sometimes just doesn't happen. I wanted to talk about like the perimeter feeders. So when I set up my pen, whether it be in a square, I like to have a feeder everywhere. And these feeders are great. I know they're hanging, but I wouldn't hang them. It's easier to just set them on like a block. The best thing that I found was go to like Lowe's or Home Depot and get the round pavers that you'd use in your garden. And you can only buy them in the springtime. So if you try to get them right now, you're going to be out of luck. But if you buy them, you can set them underneath there and, bury them all the way to the ground and then just set them up. And, you may, by the time you're done, you may be using four to five of them at the end. But it's just easier to do than, especially with this plastic one that's on the left, the plastic will break. And so, you just get around from having to hang it, and it's easier to just set it up there. But then on the perimeter, you can use multiple different things. I've seen people use gutters. The problem that I've found with gutters, especially if you're using like a metal gutter, is they're really sharp. And you take a chance of cutting that bird whenever they're leaning over that water. And that's something that you don't want to do. They make the plastic ones, but then those are kind of flimsy. And so those could break easily if the birds jump up there because, they're just birds. They don't really care what's there and what's not. And then you have what I always like to use was like modified PVC feeders. So when you're dealing with chicks, you may only use like a piece of 2-inch PVC, 2.5-inch PVC. You cut it in half lengthways all the way down, and then you can put a piece of wood on the end and screw in a little S hook, and then you can hang those feeders and pull them up as you go along. But as your birds get older, and especially like if you're raising turkeys or something, we always like to use 4-inch PVC. And you can either put the wood on the end, or you can get the caps for the end, like you would see if you're any kind of plumber. You can just get a cap for the end of that PVC and glue it on there, and it'll stay, and it'll keep your feed from spilling out the end. But yeah, just you kind of want as many feeders spaced out. I think, let me get back to this picture. As you can see, the feeders are spaced out. So this is kind of a small area. So we have one small water, or 2 small waters and 2 feeders. But what I would do is go around the perimeter with those 2 feeders, so that anywhere, it's kind of, you think about it like this. Anywhere those birds are turning and moving, there's either food or water, food or water. You got to make sure that they're willing to eat whatever or drink whatever is in front of them at all times. You don't want to give them the option to not do that. If you give them the option to just sit there because there's not enough food and water in there, guess what they're going to do? They're just going to sit there, and you're not going to win the show, and then you're going to be upset. So here is just talk about waters. It just kind of depends. It's up to you. What do you want to do? The 1 gallon waters are great, but you have to change them out a lot. When your birds start to get older, they're going to be, if you can only check on your waters, 8 o'clock before you go to work, and then like 5 o'clock whenever you're done with work, that's a long period of time to go without those birds potentially getting checked on. And so if you only have 2 1-gallon waters in there and you have 15 6-week-old chickens, they're going to drink all that. So at the co-op, they make 3 and 5-gallon waters. The 5-gallon waters, I'll be honest, they're heavy. And if you're dealing with a little 3rd grade kid who you want to make him do all the work, that's going to be a lot of work for them to handle. I would not recommend it. The 3-gallon waters are plenty big. You can use those for turkeys too. One of the best things that I never used whenever I was showing, but as I've gotten older, I've seen people do this, and it makes a lot of sense, and turkeys seem to like it a lot better. But with turkeys only, you can use buckets. Get a 5-gallon bucket, put it in the corner, and they'll drink out of those buckets. I don't know why they like them. It makes no sense to me. I think it's because it's easy, and turkeys are really dumb animals. But a 5-gallon bucket is a awesome water when those turkeys get up to age. Now you need to use those small waters before then, but once they get up there, it's absolutely perfect to use. Again, fresh water daily. Cannot specify that enough. You can use electrolytes when needed. Middle of the summer, maybe you use them once or twice a week. It's super hot. You want to make sure that those birds are good. They're not stressing out, and so those electrolytes might come in handy. Maybe the night before you go to show, that way they can handle the stress of being moved from one location to the next. You don't want to overdo it. You don't want to do it every day because that's just overkill. At the end of the day, fresh water is the best thing you can do, but in times of stress, the night before you cull, the night that you cull, something like that. Yeah. So again, this is just one more picture. It kind of shows the one on the right is a water, the one on the left is a feeder. But just kind of shows that's another way that you can raise them up. That is like a round paver on the bottom, and then it's sitting on 2 4x4s. The only problem with that is, man, if one of those birds gets into it, it could tip it over. So you want to make sure you have something like a foundation for it to put it on. But if you pay attention to how high those things are, see how those birds are sitting down, and that if they wanted to, they could go right up to the edge of that feeder and eat. That's what you want. These birds were meant to be lazy. You don't want them to have to work for it. If they can sit down and just pop, pop, pop the entire time, just stick their head in that feeder and eat, they will. Because they want to be as big as possible. They just want to eat, eat, eat. And so you have to make it available for them. That water is probably a little high for me, but the feeder's perfect. You kind of just want to gauge it. I say like shoulder height or like chest height whenever they're standing up. This is an old school picture. I got it from one of Dale's things, but just kind of shows it. This shows that these birds, feed in that pie pan and then getting that water to them. But yeah, I got to kind of pick it up a little bit. I'm running out of time, and I still have a little bit left. So litter, same thing. Pine wood shavings, rice hulls, crushed cane, whatever you got to use. Wood shavings are the best. I try to get something really fine too. I know like Suncoast makes the big flake shavings. I don't like them because I don't think that they soak up that much. If you can find any type of horse shaving, that's going to be the best. It soaks up the best. It's the cleanest. It helps your birds stay clean. That's the way to go. You can, if you don't clean out your litter, they're going to get breast blisters. They're going to stay dirty. And speaking as a judge, I hate touching dirty birds. I know it happens, but I hate it. My hands smell afterwards, and you just like can't get the smell off, and that's something that you don't want to have to deal with. So, floor space with broilers, you want 2 square feet per bird. After 4 weeks, you may want 3 to 4 square feet per bird. It doesn't necessarily have to be like that, but that's just optimum. Roasters after 6 weeks, which roasters just older broilers. They raise them to 8 weeks. So after 6 weeks, we want 4 to 6 square feet per bird. So you just want them to be able to space out and have room to grow. The more room they have, the bigger they're going to get. If they're cramped up in a little bitty space, they're not going to get big, and that's just the way of it. Turkeys, 2 square foot per bird up to 4 weeks of age. 6 square feet per bird up to 4 to 8 weeks, and then close to 7, maybe 10 square feet per bird once they're 12 weeks and older. It just kind of depends. Again, it's whatever you can give them. This isn't, they need this much, but they will thrive better if they have this much square feet. Lighting programs, broilers, it's easy. Roasters, it's easy. You want continuous light all the time. You want to simulate daytime is the thought. And if it's daytime all the time for those birds, guess what they're going to do? They're going to eat all day. And so that's what we're trying to do with turkeys. With toms, as they get older, you want normal, up until 10 weeks or so, you want them on full light. But then as they start to get older, you want to decrease them to kind of like day length type. And by day length, I mean like May and June day length. So it may be December. You don't want them having, 8 hours of light or 10 hours of light like we normally have. You want them to have like 16 hours of light and then 8 hours of darkness. And hens, this is especially true. So if you give hens too much light, they'll go into laying. And especially with the major shows, whenever we're showing at San Antonio, those birds are really young. But as we get to Houston and Austin, those birds get to 16, 18 weeks, and you take a chance of your hens starting to lay eggs. And so that's why we want to limit day length. Sorry. One of these big important things that I hear people say is it's movement, not exercise. One problem that I've heard people say is, I took my turkeys on a walk through the neighborhood because I wanted them to get exercise. Well, all they're doing is burning calories. And what happens when you burn calories? You start to lose weight. And that's great for you, but it's not for these chickens. We don't want them to get up and run. We don't want to freak them out. The proper caring of these birds is going to be enough exercise. So walking in the pens, even if it's just walking from one end of the pen to the other end of the pen, getting those birds up. Stirring your shavings by taking that stick and running it through the bottom. That if you do every inch of that, guess what? Every bird is going to have to move. I know people have tried things like loud noises to get their birds to run, or putting other animals in there with them to get them to run, and that just causes problem. The biggest thing is to just get human interaction, get in there as much as you can. I know sometimes it's really hard to do, but the more you're in those pens, the more that they are getting up. And every time they get up, they move to a feeder or a waterer, and they sit down and start eating again. And that's the goal. We don't want them. You want to get in there and make sure you're moving them too, because you don't want them to stay in one side for too long, because then they'll get lopsided. And that's not the worst thing in the world, but it definitely hurts you whenever potentially hurts you whenever you're getting to the show ring. So So this just kind of goes the 10 basic essentials for, good management. When we need adequate floor space, we need to feed a high quality feed with adequate feeders. Make sure the birds are staying comfortable. They're not too hot, not too cold. Provide plenty of ventilation once they get to where they're able to handle it, making sure you're getting as much air movement over them as you can to cool them down if they're hot. Good quality litter. You got to stir that stuff daily, making sure that, if it needs to be cleaned out, like suck it up and go spend the $20, $30 on the shavings at the feed mill. At the store, and make sure that it's clean and make sure that those birds are comfortable. Walk the birds as much as possible. Keep the feeders and waters adjusted. Like I said, keep them hanging. Don't go too high, but you don't want them too low. One thing to say that about waters, if those birds have to get too low, they don't have a tongue. Well, they do have a tongue, but their tongue doesn't work like ours where it can help push stuff back. So you ever seen a bird drink? They put their head in there and then they have to lift it up and they have to go straight up in the air with it. That's how they swallow. So if that water's too low, they're losing water out of their mouth and it's not working properly. So you just have to help them out as much as you can. We need to cull deliberately and we need to be observant of your birds. They're going to let you know if they need something. So culling, I have a couple slides on this. It's important to cull, but it's important to cull for the right reasons. We're eliminating poor quality birds. If you're a weekend and you see 2-3 birds that are just way behind the pace, they're a lot smaller, get them out of there. They're only going to basically eat your food and cause your bill to go up for no reason. Unless you just want to hold on to them, they're just wasting space inside your pen where your birds could be thriving. It helps you reduce competition, improve performance, prevent cannibalism, reduce disease problems and risk, and then maintain your adequate feeder space. So whenever we say we need 2-3 square feet per bird, well, we get a couple birds out and that goes up. What we're trying to call the crippled, runty, the unthrifty birds that aren't really eating, like I said, you'll be able to tell those as you're going, After you've made your last culling selection, if you're getting to a week before show and you see like 2 birds that just never quite got there, get them out of there. There's no point in holding on to them, because if you can tell from the naked eye that a bird is smaller than the others, it's not gonna live up to what you want it to be. And then deformed individuals if they have any kind of issues. One thing to go back to culling, it all depends up to you when you cull. But what I try to tell people is cull once. If you cull it 2 weeks, that's fine. If you cull it 3 weeks, that's fine. But get down to whatever you want. And I usually say let's cull it 3 weeks, and then you can get down to everything that you'll need to go up to show. After you touch them at 3 weeks, there's no reason to pick that bird up ever again. The moment you put them in the pen at day 0, when we cull at 3 weeks and then we go to show, those are the only 3 times that we need to be picking these birds up. The more you grab them and handle them, the more that they're going to get stressed out and they're going to go off feed for a couple days. Or not a couple days, but a couple hours. And every hour matters when we're doing these show birds, okay? So when you're culling, you can do it 2 ways. You can do it by feel or you can do it by weight. It's up to you. If you want to do it by feel, if you think you have that knowledge, then feel free to do that. Me personally, we always did it by weight at 3 weeks because we did a straight run show. So my local county show is straight run. So it didn't matter if they were pullets or cockerels. And so we just wanted the biggest birds. And so for the most part, at 3 weeks of age, your biggest birds are going to be your best birds. And that's what I would say there. The reason why we also wait to 3 weeks is whenever you're doing San Antonio, Houston, and you're trying to get pullets out of there, 3 weeks is about the time that you can more than likely tell if they're a pullet or cockerel. Now, you may still have a few that you're kind of on the line of, but for the most part, you'll be able to tell what they are. So sifting. So if you've ever been to a show, you've seen us look through those birds before they go to the judge, and we're sifting those birds. So we're looking for these types of things. Bruising. The main place that you're going to see bruising is up on the wings. You're picking those birds up and they're flapping and they hit their arm on your leg or your arm or something like that, and it could potentially cause a bruise there. Sometimes we give the benefit of the doubt if a bruise is like super old and it's kind of going away. But if it's like super dark green, blue, we know that it's a very recent bruise, and you need to make sure that you're not sending that into the show ring. Cuts, tears, skin abnormalities, broken or disjointed wings. Slab-sidedness isn't necessarily a sifting defect. If it's a big bird, I'd send it to the show no matter what. Deformities, I mean, so at the end of the day, when we're sifting these birds, every bird that goes in the show has to be an A-grade quality bird. And so what that means is whenever you buy it in the grocery store, it has to be A-grade quality. So bruises aren't A-grade, broken bones aren't A-grade. Disjoints, you can have one disjoint, but usually if it's disjointed, it's going to be followed up with a bruise. Now, you could potentially have a disjoint that is 3 weeks old, and then therefore that's fine. It can just stay in there and it doesn't have a bruise, you're fine. But if you have 2 disjoints, then that downgrades it to a B as well. So that's just something that we need to pay attention to, make sure that you're sending in a good bird every single time. Another important thing that we look for is wing bands. You got to have a wing band. If it doesn't have a wing band, it can't go through the show. So be paying attention to that. So selection and judging, this changes for everybody. This just kind of puts it up, kind of what we're going through in our mind. This isn't necessarily exactly how I think, but this is how I would say the majority of the judges think. Conformation, that's the shape of the breast. Fleshing, how much meat do they have? Finish, how much meat is going up towards the top of that keel bone. And then uniformity, does your pin of 3 match? Uniformity doesn't matter in turkeys because you're only showing one at a time, but with chickens it does. I would say I'm more on the line of probably 10% uniformity. I don't really care how uniform they are as long as they're big birds. There are some judges, it's paying attention to who your judge is. For the most part, you're going to know who your judge is a while before the time of the show. So maybe asking around, hey, what does this judge look for? What are they wanting? Do they want uniform birds? That kind of thing. It's just being able to pay attention. So this just kind of shows this is what you're going to do whenever you're showing these birds. You want to make sure that all the birds are level. You don't want the judge to have to work. I know sometimes it's really hard with little kids. The only thing I can say there is, man, get those birds up, one leg in each hand and raise them as high as you can. But it's important that the other kids that are with them are hanging them the same height as that smallest kid. I know they do the best job that they can, and most judges are going to work with them on that. So it's not necessarily a problem, but this goes a long way for showmanship. We pay attention to this when we're doing showmanship. If all the birds are different heights, that's something that we're going to know and think about. And so just making sure that they're one height. This is one more picture. It just kind of shows that. And just understanding that same height all the way through is important. And this kind of shows, what he's looking for. He's running that hand up all the way to the top of that keel bone, trying to see that finish, see how much meat they have up there. So, yeah, that's kind of it.